We are involved in ministry in Puerto Rico. We're involved in ministry in Zambia, Africa. We're involved in ministry in the ministry's near Germany. It's called the Pink Door. We're helping people come out of human trafficking. And we're involved in ministry in Costa Rica and Central America. And tonight, our missionaries are here. And it is so good to have them with us. And I want to introduce you to Abby and Jason Torgeson. Would you give it up for them? Abby, if you're going to use it, this will be your mic. And Jason, it's a joy to have you here, brother. Bienvenidos a la casa de Dios.
Gracias.
Amen.
That's about all my Spanish.
Half of the church didn't understand what I said.
That's all right. I
They're
didn't
all
either.
Chicanos,
And I live in
know.
Costa Rica, so I'm learning. My son, my 3-year-old's I'm just trying to keep ahead of him. That's all I'm trying to do in life is just one step ahead of my 3-year-old. He comes home and starts singing songs. I have no idea what he's singing. But I want to know if he's talking about me. That's the big thing. It is so great to be here, guys. During the service, I actually started crying because this is my home. I lived in New Mexico, Albuquerque when I was a little kid, when I was a heathen. My parents didn't know Christ. My parents didn't know the church. And so we were stationed, my dad was stationed in Kirkland Air Force Base, and so we were here in the 80s, about 6-8 years here in New Mexico. My little sister was born here. And it's just a city that has always been on my heart, just always been on my heart. Memories of Uncle Cliff's. How many of you guys remember Uncle Cliff's? I mean, I say Uncle Cliff's. Now it's Cliff's. I was like, what's this? Where's Uncle Cliff's? Apparently, Uncle's no longer around. I remember going up to Sandia Heights. It's Sandia Heights, right? That's what they call it, where you walk up. I was like 7 years old, and I walked up with my dad. And if it's still the same, it was always uneven ground. So you're walking like this the entire time, that when you level out, you're still walking like this as you're going. And I was laughing at my dad. I was like, why are you walking funny? He goes, what are you talking about? You're walking funny. And I was like, oh. But it's so good to be back to New Mexico. When we were passing through, I was so excited to be passing through, and Pastor, he was just gracious, made time for me. I came in and talked with him and just heard a little bit about the heartbreak that's happening in New Mexico. I heard a little bit because I had a good coworker. I was in law enforcement in Washington before I answered the call to do ministry. And it was heartbreaking to hear the things that are going on in Albuquerque, but know that we're praying, know that I'm praying for you guys, because this is a city that has a lot of potential and has some amazing people. So for me, like I said, I was raised as a heathen. I was raised in an environment that was, if you're going to drink, don't drive. If you're going to have sex, use protection. If you want to try drugs, make sure it's natural. That was my guideline growing up. I mean, and don't embarrass your dad, because the first sergeant's going to be on his case if I mess up. And don't lose your ID card. That was like the ultimate sin. And so throughout my life, my dad was very abusive. I loved him, but he didn't know how to father. He didn't know how to love his kid. And he was never loved as a kid himself. And so when I turned about 17, 18-year-old, there was a gentleman named Josh Harrison that came into our family. And Josh Harrison introduced Christianity to my older sister. And so when we moved up to Washington, their relationship broke up, and my sister continued to go to church. And she would literally drag me to church because she didn't want to go by herself. And I'd be out partying until 2, 3 o'clock in the morning. She'd drag me out Sunday morning, and I'd be like, I don't want to go. And so I'd go to church with her. And so when I turned 18, I did kind of the one last trying to get my dad's approval, because he was in the military. I was like, I'm going to join the Air Force. Maybe my dad will be proud of me. And so I joined the service. I went down to basic training. They take all your hair. I had a lot more hair back then, but they take all your hair. They take all your liberty. They take all your freedom and your identity. Because your identity, oftentimes, when it's not in the Word, it's in music. It's in yourself. It's in the things that make pleasure or give you joy. And it all becomes self-focused, self-centered. And so when I was in basic training, all that stripped away, I realized I had nothing. But my entire life, even when I was going out partying and doing all these other things, I knew there had to be something more to life. What was it? And I could never figure. It was like being a kid on Christmas Eve, getting excited about the presents that were going to come the next day. That same feeling dwelled in me, but I didn't know what it was. I knew there was something bigger. And so I went to basic training. I made promises, sitting in a room, 900 grown men, all bald, all looking the same, all lonely, all homesick. I probably was a little uglier. If you want to see a funny picture, I've got my military ID. I'll show you afterwards, but it's pretty scary. All the promises that were made in that room. When we went to basic training, or when we left basic training, went to party school or tech school, is where everybody gets their freedoms back and everybody goes right back to their old way of thinking. And I sat and I looked and I said, I felt God saying, is this who you want to be? Do you want to go back to that? And I had a choice. And at that time, I was ready to go back to my old ways. And Josh Harrison showed up at the dormitory. He was in the National Guard, had rank and privilege to sign me off base. And he took me every weekend off base to a church. He mentored me. He walked alongside me. He gave me food. He took me out to eat, and he loved me. Loved me like a father should love me. And so that's what catalyzed, that's what cemented it. I said, okay, Lord, I'm here. I'm on this. And so that sparked into a whole new journey where I've been working with churches on and off and working for the police department and being the light to a very dark world. And when I was in Bellingham, Washington, my dad retired in the military and moved there my senior year. And we stayed in Washington State for quite some time. And I just felt God was calling me to missions. And I said, okay, Lord, I will as soon as I can raise my platform, my foundation. Because I don't want to ask for money. I'll ask for money for the project and the ministries and that stuff. But for me, I can't do it. So once I build my security and my income and my background, then I'll do it when I retire, because this is my retirement job. And God said, no, I want you. And so he had to introduce me to my wife, who's much younger than me, enticed me to mission. She was on the missions field, and I said, oh, okay, God, I could do this if I got a partner. And so, and there's a whole other story to that. I'll let my wife share that one. But so our new role in with Church of God Ministries, I work for Cornwall Church. I don't know if you guys know Gerald Marvel. He's Bob Marvel is Gerald Marvel's son. He's got a church, small little church, about 2,500 people in Bellingham, Washington. I was on staff there doing missions, and I just loved missions, but I could not give up the local church. So when I was gone, I said, God, you got to take one of these away. I can't do both. He said, no, you're going to do both. So we ended up doing both, and I'll tell you a little bit later about how that developed. Our new role for Church of God Ministries is basically we're going to Costa Rica as the missionaries to Costa Rica to bring teams and so forth. Before we actually launched, and after I talked with the pastor and told him what our plan was and everything else, we were approached by our organization that says, hey, look, we want you as the regional consultants for Latin America. We don't want you just focus on one country. We want you 19 countries. And we want you to supervise the missionaries, Church of God missionaries there, and we want you to oversee projects. Okay. So we're a little bit overwhelmed, and tonight coming here, you guys have restored a huge piece in my heart, and it's healed me. Oh.
So just a little bit about my story and background. My life's a little different than Jason's. Am I echoing to you guys too? Hey, there we go. That's better. All right. So I grew up as the total opposite. My dad's actually a pastor in the Church of God, and my grandfather was a pastor in the Church of God, great-grandfather, great-grandmother, kind of about as dyed in the wool as you can get in that aspect. But as I was growing up, I never had any interest in going into ministry. I said, that's fine for Dad, and I love the Lord, and I'm going to serve him, but I have no interest in ministry. And so my original plan was to go to law school, and God began to start working on my heart and said, no, you're not going to law school, you're going to seminary. I said, fine. I'm studying Spanish, I'll go to seminary, I'll learn to be a pastor, but I am not going overseas, will not do it. And once again, God began working on my heart and said, yeah, actually, I got a different plan for you. And so there's a whole sequence of events as to why I ended up doing an internship in Colombia, and it was a place that just broke my heart, and I said, this is where God has called me to go. I fell in love with Colombia, I fell in love with the leaders, and before I could go to Colombia as a missionary, I finished up my seminary, and then I had to go to Costa Rica for 4 months to finish up some language school, and I hated it. Nothing to do with Costa Rica. As I look back, it's not the Costa Ricans' fault. I know some personal factors that were going on in my life, but I said, I will never go back to that country again. But while I was there, the one kind of redeeming thing of my experience in Costa Rica was a couple that picked me up every Sunday. They walked alongside me. They encouraged me. They built me up and really helped prepare me for my time in Colombia. But they kind of had a reputation of being some matchmakers. And so after I got to Colombia, maybe a year or two after I got to Colombia, they started bugging me and said, there's this missions pastor in Washington State who's been to Costa Rica a lot. You should meet this guy. No, I am not interested in that. Thank you very much. No. And they kept persisting, and, well, okay, now you know the end of the story, right? Here we are. And so as I was wrapping up my time in Colombia, we realized that, okay, we have this serious relationship. If we're going to get married, one of us should probably move. And so it made more sense for me to go to Washington where he was living. And I got to Washington and once again hated it. But it wasn't the problem of Washington. It was a problem with me and this identity I built of myself saying, you know, I'm this missionary and I'm this great person I thought I was. And here I am in Washington and I'm a housewife and now what? You know, I've talked to the cat. And during that time, I went to church, and the pastor was preaching on Jeremiah 29:11. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you a hope and a future. And he reminded us that that was a verse written to people in exile, people who did not want to be where they were, and yet God had plans for them. And I felt really convicted because I said, okay, once again, God has plans for me in this place. And about that time, Jason and I started talking about getting back into missions, and lo and behold, Jason said, I think the Lord's calling us to Costa Rica. I said, no, he's not. You know that I do not like that place. I will never go back to Costa Rica. And I felt the Lord once again saying to me, Abby, you fought me on the call to missions, or ministry. You fought me on the call to missions. Do you recognize what this feels like yet? Yes, Lord. I went to Jason and said, I think we're going to Costa Rica. But even as we were called to Costa Rica, as Jason shared, the Lord opened some doors and some opportunities for this new role. And I love Costa Rica, and ironically, we're back in the same neighborhood where I live, attending the same church where I attended before. We just purchased a house, actually, in that neighborhood. It's incredible how the Lord just redeems. But we have the opportunity to work across Latin America, and we have the opportunity to kind of represent also global strategy, which is just the fancy name for the missions arm of the Church of God, Anderson, Indiana. And so part of what we do is we get to be a part of conversations about what's going on the global level. And I'm not sure if I'm not sure if we had some slides or not, if they're working, but we had there's a mission statement that we have as an organization, which is to walk alongside the local church globally, pursuing the development of healthy churches that are locally led and sustained, regionally connected, missionally engaged, so that the church can give life to communities around the world. That's a mouthful, and there will not be a quiz. I still have to read it. But we really focus particularly in our role on the walking alongside the local church globally, because so often what happens in missions world is we get this idea that those poor churches over there don't know what they're doing, so we have to go in and help them out, or have to go in and bail them out or do it for them, and that it could not be further from the truth. And the more time we spend in Latin America, the more excited we are about how strong the Latin American churches are and the incredible things that they're doing. So we're called to walk alongside the leaders, giving them a boost where they need it or support where they need it, but also connecting them to one another, saying, you know what, we don't have a clue how to deal with this situation, but there's a pastor in this other country over there who just dealt with something similar. Why don't you guys talk and get us out of it? And so a big part of our role is walking alongside the local church. And so our role, we actually kind of have a three-faceted role, which we'll share just very quickly, not to bore you guys with details. We walk alongside our missionaries, we walk alongside our national leaders, and we walk alongside our partner churches. And so Jason's going to share just briefly a little bit about how we walk alongside our missionaries and tell one story particularly of impact of how those who have partnered with us have also walked alongside our missionaries in our region.
So you guys get the popcorn effect of us jumping up and down. It's basically to keep you guys entertained so you don't get bored with me up here all the time, or I don't get too far off on a tangent and keep you guys here till 11 o'clock at night. So our missionaries, these are the missionaries we have in the top corner here on the left. That's the Paul and Katia Jones. They are in Bolivia. Oh, yeah, you can go to the next slide. There we go. And so these are the missionaries that we have currently in there. There's eight couples. We got Deborah Honeycutt in Honduras. Her daughter, Sarah Honeycutt, just got on the field, and we're actually currently in the process of recruiting a couple other missionaries as well. And so we're excited about our team. One thing you guys can be praying about is that they have not had a team meeting in probably about 8 years. And so that was one of our roles is coming into this role was they did not have a regional coordinator to bring the missionaries together so that we're all working together and pulling in the same direction. So that is actually happening this July in Orlando, right after the convention in Orlando. We're going to have our first team meeting. And if they don't want to be part of the team, they can find another team. No, but no, we're really excited. They've actually have joined in and really given us a lot of support. No, I know, I'll back off. But I do want to tell you one of the things that we're really preaching to the missionaries is family first. It has been so long and so many times as missionaries, as we've seen missionaries burn out, is that it's always been about the ministry. It's never been about the family. And that is what I love about Latin America, is family is first. Number one is family. And I think that's something that we've got to learn here in the U.S., is that we really got to start putting our family first. And so when you get missionaries from the U.S. that go into a ministry field, that they just burn themselves out because they think that that's what it's got to be, is ministry first. Tell you a quick story about little Marcos, one of our missionaries. We have the Curley family in Paraguay, and Norberto Curley and his wife, Julie Curley, were involved in a tragic accident. They were with Church God Ministries right about the same time Abby and I started getting together. And she was killed, and so was her son, Timothy, during this car accident. And it was a wreck. He was left with kids. He was left with a ministry. She was the administrative one. She held it together. And he just struggled. And for about 2 years, he struggled and floundered, and he met another girl that had the same plight, another woman that had the same plight. And she had kids as well, and so they started blending the family. And I remember my first conversation with them is just like, we're really trying to make this family thing work. And I said, do it, brother. You got to take time for your family. If your family's not healthy, the ministry won't follow. Or it will follow the same direction your family's going. And so when I went down to Paraguay and I talked to Norberto and I said, hey, how's everything going? He goes, man, I'm worried about Marcos. He goes, he wants to hang out with his friends. He wants to play football. He wants to play on his PlayStation. He doesn't say but 2-3 words. And I'm thinking, I was like, how old is he? He goes, 18. I said, well, that's your problem. He's 18. That's what 18-year-olds do. But Marcos was just so involved in ministry because I just want him to love God. I just want him to engage in ministry with his whole heart. And so I sat there and I talked to Marcos on one of the side things, and I said, hey, Marcos, I said, so what's your plan? What do you mean? I said, what do you want to do? I don't know. I said, you think you can play PlayStation for the next 70, 80 years? Yeah, that'd be cool. I said, yeah, it would be, but, it doesn't pay the bills. Doesn't advance the kingdom. And I said, hey, why don't you come to Costa Rica? He's like, what for? I said, just see ministry in a different perspective. Allow your blinders to open up for you to see something new, and maybe God will talk to you in a different voice or a different filter. Maybe you will open up your avenue just to hear God in a different tone or in a different way, that you may hear what his calling you is. Next morning, I got a call from Norberto. He goes, what did you do to my son? I go, what do you mean? He goes, well, stop talking about Costa Rica. He said he's going, and what did you tell him? I said, well, I told him there was beaches and there's ministry. Oh, yeah, we tried to get him hooked up with a girl so that he'd get married and stay in Costa Rica so we can put him to work. I think it was probably the girl connection that probably got him to be truthful. And so Marcos came down, and he engaged in an international. He's an introvert. And this is a kid that worked his way on the music stand within a day of meeting people, was up on stage playing for an international convention that they had planned. And he was up there, so I live streamed to his dad, and I said, hey, this is what your son's doing. Tears running down his face. My son. And so then I told him, I said, hey, by the way, I had to apologize to Marcos. He goes, why? Well, what happened? I said, well, I kept introducing him as this is Norberto's son, because Norberto's a legend. And I said, I had to go to him and say, man, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to overstep anything. I know, he's technically your stepdad, but I never wanted, I said, it's just people love Norberto. He goes, that's okay. I see him as my dad. And I told Norberto, and he goes, I said, hey, I introduced him. He goes, yeah, that's kind of an awkward topic. We've never talked about that. I don't know where he stands. I said, well, let me tell you. He said he's proud to be your son. Tears streaming down his face again. And I thought, man, mentoring, that's what it's about. Being able to mentor Marcos in a different environment, walk alongside him, and the benefit and the fruit of his father, hearing that his stepson sees him as his father. And I thought, how many lives does that impact? Now he goes back and he goes in Paraguay, and he engages ministry in a whole nother way. I'll let Abby come up and talk about national leaders. Oh.
So as we, along with walking alongside our missionaries, and in this case, it's kind of a hybrid missionary national leader family, we do get to walk alongside a lot of our pastors and our leaders and our leaders in Latin America. And so one of the main places that we get to do that, because we live in Costa Rica and because we talk to the Costa Ricans about coming to Costa Rica, they've still allowed us to connect with them a lot. And so we get to sit on their leadership team, and we've gotten to speak into a variety of situations in Costa Rica, which there's a whole lot of stories there we could tell you for another day. But we are still heavily engaged in Costa Rica, even though that's not our only country. We also have the opportunity to walk alongside a group of people called the SEED. So for you Spanish speakers, that's Confraternidad Interamericana de la Iglesia de Dios. The leadership team, thanks, I say that just to feel important once in a while. Feel good about my Spanish skills. So the SEED leadership team are the three men in the middle of that picture. And they started out decades ago as kind of event planners for this international conference that would happen every 2 to 3 years in Latin America. And over the years, they've started to realize that God has called them to more than just planning a convention. And what's really exciting about Latin America, more than the Church of God and the rest of the world, is that they've really stepped up. And before we were hired as regional coordinators, they said, we don't even know if we need regional coordinators. We can intervene in situations. If there's a crisis in, I don't know, making one up, in Peru, we can go in and meet with those pastors. We can work with other leaders. We can develop strategy for the region. And the office in Anderson said, that's fantastic. If you want to do that, why do you need a gringo to do that for you? You don't. And so they stepped up in that role, which is more than in the rest of the world. A lot of those situations that develop, it's still up to the regional coordinators to step in, but Latin America already has it figured out. And so our job is primarily to focus on the missionaries and the projects, and then to walk alongside the SEED in whatever it is that they need. If they need our assistance, or if they need help communicating, sometimes still the language can be an issue, or just some other things. We support them in their role, but we're so excited about the wisdom and the leadership that they bring to the region. We also work a lot with what we call projects, which, projects are projects, but projects that receive funds from Anderson or from churches in the U.S. need some oversight. And so again, because of language and cultural connections, that's a role that we oversee. And so there's, for example, a seminary in Ecuador that receives some funds. There's a radio station and a kids' school in Paraguay, and a whole host of about 15 projects around Latin America that are doing some incredible things. And so we get the opportunity to visit those project sites, see what's going on, and then help with some of the oversight and reporting related to those. And one of the connections with the North American church that we've had and with Latin America that's been a particular privilege for us has been walking alongside a little bit, just a small degree, the situation in Venezuela, which again is now in the news with what's going on there. We have 21 congregations in Venezuela that honestly we do not know how they're making it, but they are. And not just making it, a lot of those congregations have feeding programs, which is, as you know, one of the biggest crises in Venezuela right now is food shortages. We had the opportunity, we had some funds that had been donated to the Office for Hunger Relief, but the challenge was, how in the world do we get those funds in there? You can't just wire them. The banks are closely monitored, and there's all kinds of corruption. You can't just get the funds in. The best way is for someone to take the funds in on their person. And so we finally found a connection with somebody that was trustworthy, a leader from Venezuela who was working outside of Venezuela in another country but was going back for a visit. And a woman actually voluntarily carried the offering on her person back into Venezuela. Highly dangerous, but she did. And not only did she take it, she distributed the funds, she purchased food, she passed them out. Someone from one of our other countries donated balloons that say, Cristo te ama. And so they have these, so it was now this collaboration between the U.S. and Venezuela and another country in Latin America working together to bless the people. And yes, it's a perishable offering. People will eat it and it'll be done. But these churches, through the feeding programs, are also offering the bread of life to people who desperately need it. Yeah. But we do ask you to continue praying for Venezuela. This leader reported to me at that time, and it's changed, but at that time the minimum wage was 4,000, or the salario mínimo, right, the 1 month salary, monthly minimum salary for a full-time worker was 4,000 bolivares. She had gone to the store with her money that she'd earned in another country and spent 6,500 bolivares, so a month and a half's worth of income on 10 rolls, a liter of milk, and 15 eggs. And it's only getting worse. That was in January when she reported that. So we do ask you to continue to keep Venezuela in your prayers, keep our leaders in your prayers, because they're doing incredible things for the kingdom. And just pray for other opportunities that we would be able to have to send some assistance into those churches, and that they would be able to also find other ways. But it's such a privilege to just play a very, very small role in helping to make that connection. So we walk alongside our missionaries, we walk alongside our national leaders, and we do also walk alongside our partner churches, and that includes you, those who walk with us and make it possible for us to do the work that God is doing, or not even us to do, but us to allow God to do the work that he's doing. I'm going to let Jason come up and talk a little bit about our connection with partner churches, and then I'll be back to close us out.
So when Abby said we walk alongside the local churches, that's for us what I was getting at earlier about the impact of impacting the local church and the church in Latin America. We bring teams. We have teams come down, and the idea of bringing teams down is like Marcos. Somebody that's got a little bit of blinders on, that they go into a different part, and they open their blinders up, and they hear God so clear because they don't have all the distractions. They don't have the television, they don't have the cell phone ringing, they don't have, the pressures of, how am I going to pay for this month's rent? How am I going to do this? How am I going to do that? You just show up, and God provides. And then what we do is we challenge them, because we're not trying to create missionaries. What we're trying to do is create missionaries. Well, we are trying to create missionaries. We're trying to create missionaries in local communities, because we challenge every team that comes out. And I would challenge each of you guys, if you guys ever go on a mission trip, whether it's to Latin America or it's any other place, always keep in the back of your mind, Lord, how do you want me to engage when I get back? Why on this trip is going to impact and challenge the community here in Albuquerque? When Abby says the partnerships that we have, we would not be able to do what we would do. We would not be able to stand up on this stage and tell you these stories, these incredible stories that God's doing, without the faithful prayers and financial support. Your church has been so incredible blessing. I can't even say it without tearing up. Being here tonight has been such a blessing to be able to reconnect with Albuquerque, reconnect with you guys. But what you guys have given us and the prayers that you guys give us is incredible. And so every one of these stories, you have a factor in this. And not only are you impacting one country in Costa Rica, you're impacting all 19 countries where we got churches in Costa Rica, or in Latin America. So I would encourage you, when we're done with the service, if you want to be a part of our newsletter, write your email down. We would love to send you the updates, our newsletter that Abby puts together, so that you can see the things that you guys are giving to, the things that you guys are praying for, the lives that you are changing outside of Albuquerque. And I want to thank you guys on behalf of all the churches in Costa Rica, Latin America, and all over the place, the work that you guys have done. And I would challenge you not to let it stop there. I would ask you to get into your community. I would ask you to look for mentors in your life that you can walk alongside, that you can be a Josh Harrison or you can be a Marcos, and you can mentor somebody and walk somebody through and have them sit right next to you during the service. And when you get that new building, you're going to fill that building up. By the time that you guys get comfortable, you're going to be looking at the next place because you're going to be overflow. Thank you.
remind you that was a verse written to people in exile, written to people who didn't necessarily want to be where they were at that time. And some of them were there because they had sinned and the Lord had sent them there to punish them. And some of them were there because their neighbors had sinned and the whole country got shipped off in exile, and even though they'd done nothing wrong. And they were all desperate to get out, and they were hearing messages from their prophets that were saying, oh, this is going to be short term, you're going to go home soon. And the Lord said, no. If you read the rest of Jeremiah 29, the Lord says to them, plant your gardens, marry off your children, you're going to be here a while. However, I have plans for you. Plans to prosper you and not to harm you. Plans to give you a hope and a future. And I just want to encourage you, I've just met a few of you tonight. I don't know you. I don't know your circumstances. I don't know what you're going through personally. I don't know what your congregation's going through. But maybe tonight there's some of you who feel like you're in a place of exile, a place where you do not want to be, a stage of life that you don't want to be in, a situation that you don't want to be in. But I want to encourage you, when we say the Lord has plans, that's not just flippant. Those are plans to use the very situation where you are. Not just to prosper you and to give you a hope and a future, but the people around you, the people that God has placed in your life and in your path. He's called you to that place for a purpose and for a reason. And even if you didn't choose to be there, and even if someone else's sin took you into that place, God can redeem it. And I just want to encourage you as we close tonight just to be reflecting on where it is that the Lord has called you. How are you seeing him be faithful to you in that stage of life? And how is he calling you to bless the people around you in the situation where you are, in your family, in your work, in your school, in your neighborhood? Who is that person that God is calling you to walk alongside? Because God says, no matter where you are, I will walk alongside you. I will be there with you. But I'm also calling you to walk alongside someone else. Maybe it's your son, your daughter, your grandkid, your niece, your nephew, the neighbor boy, the kid whose mom comes home at 10 o'clock at night and he sits home playing his video games all day. That person on the street that everybody turns their head when they go by. I don't know. Who is that person that God is calling you to walk alongside in the place where you are right